disorder. I was having between 40 and 50 seizures a day. My mental state was, I need to be undeniably good at this to justify me not being in the therapies that I'm being pushed to go into. And so when something has meaning to you, you're going to beat the people that it doesn't have meaning to every time. I went to go buy a hot dog at 7-Eleven, and my card got declined, and I couldn't afford a $1.79 hot dog.
Gotta get better, can't fake forever, rage against the screaming.
Fantastic.
Cool. So there's something that I wanted to. In fact, no, I don't want to. I don't want to kind of butcher what you've already said. So you sent me through a bunch of notes around your story, and it's incredible. And I don't want to butcher it. So can I just ask you to kind of go through your story again? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. I mean, how I got started in fitness, maybe that's a good place to start. I got into fitness very, very early on in my life. So, as a young kid, I would say 5, 6 years old, I had a seizure disorder. I was having between 40 and 50 seizures a day, which was, obviously it's debilitating at that level. It's very rare. Normally, people who have seizure disorders, it's possible to have a few a day. To get to the point where you're having 40 to 50 today, a day is, as you can imagine, it's a debilitating sort of problem.
That's like 2 an hour or more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
was it like through the night as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I would say even especially during times where I was more tired, if that makes sense.
Wow.
It was even more common. So it's sort of, at 5 or 6, you sort of have the regular 5 or 6-year-old, problems or whatever it is, needing to be monitored constantly. And then added on top of that, of course, I was in a lot of hospitals very frequently. I had to fly back and forth from New York to Chicago frequently, drive, taking several drives there also, because that's where the best neurologist was.
Hmm.
And the condition I had was so exceedingly rare that we really did, I guess, get access to the best neurologist for that. And again, childhood epilepsy, it's not very unusual. It's not something that's extremely rare. However, most children who have epilepsy, or have a seizure disorder, typically they'll have just a few seizures throughout the day or none, or, they'll have a fever and have a seizure, right? So it's sort of onset because of that.
Hmm.
But again, my situation was so rare that I was kind of, I was in that category of, okay, I'm living in New York, I'm flying to Chicago, driving to Chicago, I'm in and out of hospitals kind of frequently. Luckily for myself, the doctors, they put me on many adult seizure medications just due to severity. Yeah, and then over time, I was weaned off of that and gradually stopped having seizures altogether, which was really miraculous for me and my family and everything like that. But the medication itself, it was, it was very high dosages of benzodiazepines. And so essentially it was that part of it added to the sort of debilitating element of the whole situation. So it was not just the problem of having the seizures, it was then added on to that. Now I'm taking this medication to be off that, and that medication is causing all of these negative side effects, right? So very, very drowsy, very, very sleepy throughout the day, sort of just zombified, I guess, if that makes sense, On top of that, I would say education wasn't really happening at the development it should have been happening at. In addition to that, muscle tone was not happening at the development that should have been happening. Because again, if you're 5 or 6 years old, you should be running around, you should be
Yeah.
active, you should be kind of engaging. But the medication, in addition to making me very inactive and very drowsy and lethargic, I also have a lot of memory of it giving me migraine headaches. I have, really just, also a lot of memory of it just slowing me down in general. Even the time when I was awake and, I guess, quote unquote, active,
Hmm.
it was not to the same activity of someone my age. And so while it did limit the seizures, and that sort of was a life-saving or a life-changing sort of element, we had this secondary effect of it being, really slowing my development or impeding my development. And then I can go on, but because of that, I was in several therapies. So from a young age, from the time I was about, really from the time I can remember, I don't want to say 6 years old because it might have even been before that, but I would say from a young age, maybe 5-ish, 6 years old. I don't have a clear memory on it. Up until middle school, which I would have been 11 or 12 at that point, I was in physical therapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapy. which for those, I mean, the listeners might not know, but physical therapy is, of course, more focused on, your physical body. And so that was sort of more aimed at my reaction time, trying to increase my reaction time because I'd fall down flat on my face. I did not have the reaction time to, put my hands up and catch myself, for example. It was aimed at that, and I had very low muscle tone. So I was in a disability stroller for the most part. And of course, like going on class field trips, for example, and going to and from school and being taken to doctor's appointments and things like that. I was very much so in a stroller for a large portion of time up until I was probably in middle school as well. Maybe a little bit younger, I started to get out of that. So the physical therapy was again aimed at reaction time. It was aimed at gaining some muscle tone, just being a healthy child, really.
Hmm.
And then occupational therapy was more focused on my fine motor skills. So one issue that I had was because of the low muscle tone, my writing was very, very light and illegible, light to the point of illegibility, right? So
Yeah.
the actual, using a pencil to press on the paper was a difficult task for me as a young
Wow.
kid. And then speech therapy, I had word finding issues, right? So almost imagine like a stutter where you're choking on trying to find the right word, right? So if I'm looking in the kitchen, I'm trying to find a pan. I'd be like, "What's that thing that cooks eggs with?" Or it'd be sort of that level of word finding issue where I'd stumble on words like that a few times, maybe even a sentence. To the point where I wouldn't call it a stutter, but it was a challenge, right? It was, and I had to go to a speech pathologist to correct that because again, I think that was more of a developmental thing and medication that was slowing me down was making that difficult as well.
So the benzodiazepine, what is that specifically for this kind of ailment? Did you have epilepsy? Is that what it was?
Yeah, yeah, and the drugs, I mean, to get hyper specific, I don't know if it's anything that, I don't know if it's anything that anybody would recognize some of the drugs, but it was like phenobarbital was a big part of it. But yeah, they were specifically designed to limit the seizures, and I don't know how far sort of the science has come since, I had that condition, but basically to explain a little bit of neurology, what a seizure is a misfiring, right? And so basically your brain is trying to, and I'm going to butcher this because I'm not a neurologist and I'm not nearly smart enough to be studying that, but basically it's almost like when your brain is operating, it's almost like darts to a dartboard, right? There's sort of an electrical firing and there's a capture, right? So
Okay.
it's almost like you're throwing the dart and it's landing on the board. And normal brains are that firing is happening, that's sort of being received. And as long as that process is uninterrupted and non-problematic, everything is normal, right? And with people who have seizures, it's a misfiring of those neurons from what I understand. And so it's sort of, fire goes off, it's not received, or multiple fires go off and it's not received right. And that's why generally tend to see these sort of, physical reactions and movements that are not, it's almost like an error right in the brain. And there's a lot that they can do to sort of correct that, but what these drugs end up doing is sort of slowing the whole process down from what I understand,
Okay.
right? And I'm sure if you have a neurologist listen, I'm sure they'll say, "Oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about." So, but just, I mean, but yeah, so it's a process of slowing it down as far as what I experienced. And for me, it was very much so like a slowing down process for me, right? It was much more sleepy, much more lethargic,
Yeah.
not thinking as fast. I had a professional in school, for example. From the time I was young, I would say from the time I was maybe, again, 4 or 5 years old up until, again, middle school, right? So 6th grade, so maybe 10 years old or 11 years old, something along
Right.
those lines. And they'd be doing things for me like reminding me to wipe drool off my face, right? So it would just be drooling and the therapist would go, "Psst, hey, wipe your face a little bit, right?" So again, it was just things that were low muscle tone, slowing down. But it's again facial muscles. How do you strengthen a facial muscle? You can't really do that. You have to just be normal in order to have that, right? That's why if you see people with neurological impairments or mental impairments, those are common issues to have, right? It's not something that can really be practiced out. It's just something you have to live without and have normal development to not experience, if that makes sense.
Sure. So did you have this from birth?
Not from birth, no. It kind of came on in childhood. No real reason why. It wasn't like we ever saw my head get banged as a kid or anything like that. It was sort of just a very strange interruptance in my childhood, I guess.
Okay. When did you come off of these drugs?
I might be mistaken with the exact date or the exact timeline in my life. From what I remember, I must have been 8 or 9-ish years old. I can still remember the taste of the medication. It was pretty jarringly a bad taste, right? But I would say even the seizures is one part of it, right? And I guess I wouldn't talk too much about that because it's hard to even recall a lot of those issues, right?
Okay.
But what's easy for me to recall is sort of the issues after that of I was on the medication, being weaned off the medication. Finally, I'm off the medication and I'm sort of starting childhood at 10 years old with many, many, many impairments that
Yeah.
my peers are not sort of facing. And coupled with that, psychologically and IQ wise, I would say I was very average, if not very above average for my age during that time, right? And so a lot of the struggles that I sort of faced was being placed with people who were, had sort of special needs, right? In school, it was what they had an IEP, right? An individual education plan,
Okay.
and being sort of very delayed in some ways, but in other ways very normal and even in other ways very advanced, right? I was like my mathematical abilities were always very, very high, but and even my ability to write was very, very strong from a young age because my writing wasn't impaired by my word finding issues just because, you take all the time you need to find those words when you're writing, right? So you're not limited by the speed of your dialogue.
Mhm.
And so, there was this counterbalance of being very normal and recognizing the ways in which I was normal and also being very abnormal and recognizing those ways as well, or I guess even from a young age, trying to delegitimize that for myself and trying to overcome that. And so I guess sort of my adult life, or really where I would start the story of what was important, was probably middle school,
Yeah.
where essentially coming into middle school, I was very, 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 very thin, wiry, but also kind of fat at the same time, right? So I had like this skinny fat sort of physique where I was not muscular at all. I was not athletic, right? And I guess as a personal trainer, I described it as skinny fat, right? When someone
Okay.
comes in and they're simultaneously overweight in the sense of their body fat composition, but underweight in the sense of their muscular development,
Right.
which aligns for a very tricky sort of problem health wise and I guess conditioning wise, because you're burdened by all of this, body fat that's sort of weighing you down and slowing you down, but you don't have that muscularity to really support it. Right. And
Mhm.
so now training is harder, right? Something like a push up would be very hard for a person like that because they don't have the strength to lift their own body weight in a lot of ways. And so, coming into middle school, before middle school, I was in speech, occupational, and physical therapy. Having sort of dialogue with my parents, I really was over physical therapy. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy any of the therapies, right? But I didn't really have any sort of bartering chips to get rid of the occupational therapy to speech therapy.
How much time, like, was it a daily thing, these therapies?
Yeah, I actually remember my schedule. So physical therapy was twice a week. Occupational therapy was twice a week. Speech therapy was once a week. And then in addition to those, sort of under the advisement of professionals at the time, they advised that I do other activities to increase sort of my fine motor skills plus my physical development, right? So I was taking piano lessons, which the idea was, oh, I could press on the keys and sort of develop fine motor skills in an easier way than writing, maybe.
Yeah.
And in addition to that was basketball, which even though I was absolutely horrible at that age, I loved. So, I mean, but so that was my schedule. Is really I had a very, very regimented childhood from the time I was say 5 years old up until I mean, permanently, really. I mean, I've never not had a very regimented sort of system, I guess. But the bargain I made as a middle schooler was I told my parents, look, can I quit physical therapy and join some type of team, some other additional sport, right? Do something that's physically active, but not physical therapy. Because it was a very, as you can imagine, having all of those therapies and they being, them being all one on one, I was not very well socialized, I would
Right.
say, up until that point. Most of the interactions I had as a child were with other adults, right? It was, me being with the physical therapist, me being with the occupational therapist, me being with the speech therapist, me being with the piano tutor, right? Me being with a coach. And then, of course, my parents and doctors, right? And, there was not, when I was a kid, there were not play dates as much. I didn't get invited to a whole lot of birthday parties or things like that as a kid just because my condition was very limiting. And I think there was sort of two prongs, right? It was understanding that I needed a lot of medical attention and other parents could pick up on that and say, hey, look, this is probably a liability that we just don't
Mm.
want to attend, my child's event. We don't want the event to be about the kid with the condition. We want the event to be about the kid whose birthday it is. Totally reasonable. And so there was that element coupled with the element of what was I actually capable of doing? What was I actually capable of attending and being a part of without really, it was still being able to even enjoy it for myself, right? I mean, how much interruption to my schedule could I even have with all of the therapies and everything else?
Right.
So me and sort of being young, I was sort of desperate for that level of socialization, saying like, look, I'll do whatever sport, I'll do whatever needs, whatever needs to be done. I just don't want to be totally booked up all the time to the point where I have no friends and I can't socialize.
Hmm.
And so sort of the agreement I made specifically, I would say with my mother was, look, you can join the cross country team and quit physical therapy. All right. So you can do track, field, running, cross country. And we could push physical therapy out, sort of keep the speech and occupational therapy, but at least we could do that. And that was a fair deal, and that's sort of how I got started into athletics.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, like, sorry to go back to it, but
Yeah.
I can't. So I've got two young children myself, and my eldest is 5. So I'm
Wow.
just picturing like how debilitating that must have been for your parents. Obviously, it was debilitating for yourself, but like I can't imagine it's like a full-time thing, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
were you so age of 5? Okay, so presumably it's the same in the States, but in the UK we start school at 5. Did you go into school like at normal age?
Yeah, I was in school, but always under the guidance of a paraprofessional. So always having, I'm not sure if you're familiar, if the listener maybe, will be familiar with what a paraprofessional is. It's basically an adult that specializes in special needs children, and they're sort of on a one-to-one basis. So it's sort of
Yeah,
like I'm in school, paraprofessionals next to me, and I'm getting that assistance while everybody else is really just getting sort of direction from the teacher, right?
sure.
And so, yeah, I would agree. It was very hard on my family in that sort of sense. Of course, when I'm flying out to Chicago to get medical treatment, right? And I had an older brother as well. He's in school and his schedule is even going to be interrupted. I would say, sort of tangentially, with my parents' relationship, in a lot of ways, it may have even kept that relationship together longer than I would even argue it should have been, if that makes sense, right? So, they were married ultimately once I kind of got older, they got divorced, they separated.
Uh,
But I think during that time, and, I'm not sure if you're married and, your situation, everything, but a lot of times things that are so complicated and so difficult when you're sort of, fighting that off,
mhm.
you don't have time to focus on differences, right? You don't have time to focus on, hey, this relationship isn't where I want it to be. It's sort of more directed at, okay, we have priorities now, sort of alliance by mutual enemy sort of thing, which is the sickness and everything else, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. My parents divorced when I was like 7, and I guess it's not because, but like there was nothing such as your circumstance. There was nothing, no common enemy for them to face. Like life was good, and then I guess that they kind of focused on what wasn't good, which I guess was their marriage. So the cross country thing. So at that point, so is that just as you started middle school, or was it a bit
Yeah.
further in? So
Yeah,
you were
it was
like
just as
10,
I
11?
started. Yeah, exactly. Just as I started middle school, it was actually the middle school cross country team. And even for me, I guess on the argumentative side, because I was probably just starting to get a little bit argumentative at that age,
Mm,
was just, hey, look, I'm going to a new school. I have an opportunity to meet new people. Like, and at that point, I had gotten over some of the issues, right? I wasn't drooling on myself by that point, which seems like a trivial sort of problem, but in your social circle, it's a big deal because now you start to feel like, hey, I can have friends, right? I don't need to sort of just be monitored by a para. And because I hadn't had the seizures anymore, the para wasn't there as well. And so it was like, I'm coming to this new school. There's no paraprofessional, not exactly normal in a physical sense, but in a much more realistic sense, I can communicate relatively normally. Maybe I'm a little bit delayed socially and a little bit delayed physically, but intelligence wise, I was there, sort of starting to find my footing, if that makes
mhm.
sense.
So were you in the stroller at
Not
that
at
point?
that point. I
Okay.
had I had gotten I had gotten out of Stroller, I would say, out of really just frustration, right? As ridiculous as it sounds, I kind of even probably could have used the benefit of that for maybe even a longer time, I would say.
Mhm.
But I didn't enjoy, and young kids are brutal, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
think young kids are the most brutal out of everybody, right? Most violent, most mean, right? If you're 6 years old, are tyrants, really. And I didn't like being called a baby, for example, or
Hmm.
really, I didn't like being ever carried. Also, was another thing, right? I didn't like, hey, this person is exhausted and looks like they're kind of falling apart walking, you know, carry this person. I got kind of over it and I just said, I don't want to be carried. I don't want to be pushing a stroller. I don't want any of that. And even for me, it was more like, hey, there'd be a preference to just not go if I knew I was going to be
Oh
seen
yeah.
in a certain light. You know what I mean? So what cross country was really, it was a big negotiation because I knew coming onto that cross country team, I was not going to be an athlete, right? I knew that in many regards, I was running the risk of being the odd one out, delaying the whole program, right?
Right.
Because we go to a certain event, for example, go to a race, and if everybody else is running, say, a 10-minute mile and you're walking for the most part, well, now the whole team is waiting for you to show up, right? And that, I would say, was a very positive peer pressure to make me not, you just not want to be in that position, right? I don't want the program to be delayed by me. I don't want my, eyes on me saying, where is this guy? We might have lost him at mile 1 or mile 2, and it's a 5-mile race, for example. But so that was the negotiation. My older brother had done cross country running also. And so they kind of, my parents said, oh, I thought that was a great thing for them. And I think it'll be a great thing for you. And got into cross country early on where my mother would attend to watch me, basically. Because in the event that I did get lost through or couldn't, I guess couldn't keep up with the pack, at least she could stay behind and be like, okay, and make sure he finishes, make sure we can drive him home if we need to, really just monitoring the situation, and that was the first negotiation I sort of made. Gradually, speech therapy and occupational therapy, I kind of, for lack of a better word, I protested my way out of those. I just said, at a certain point, at a certain age, I really just sat down and said, I just refuse. Really just quit, to be honest. I got sick of it. One of the things in occupational therapy would be constant writing, constant writing. So it was, really just a lot of pen and pad being told, firmer, firmer, write firmer, right? It's not, this is getting lighter. We need you to be firmer. Take a minute, write firmer and legibly, right? And I got to the point where I just said, I'm not going to write beautifully. This is out of the question for me. And I just said, I'm done. I'm not going to write anything else. I'm not going to participate in this anymore. And I really just sat and protested a lot of those therapies, just saying, I'm just not going to do it. But I would say, as far as like things that actively changed my life, I'd say cross country was the thing that changed my life for sure, in a physical sort of sense.
How did you make it? You said it was the cross country team. Is that correct? How
Yeah.
did you make like? Why did they allow someone such as yourself in your scenario?
Oh, very easily. There were no tryouts. They
Just anyone could
just
join.
anyone can join. Yeah, and they couldn't, because there were no tryouts. They really couldn't kick me out.
So,
So
but you're running presumably quite a slow mile, right, compared to the other runners when you first started.
Oh yeah, I was absolutely terrible. You know, and it's funny now because a lot of those records, sort of running records, they're public, right? So when you go, if you're a road runner, right, that's what they call a road runner, like New York road runners was where I was.
Mhm.
Suppose you run a marathon, for example. Well, you can go ahead and look up your time at the end of the race. And I could look up my time from the end of these races. Sometimes it's like 15-minute mile, 16-minute mile, which for people that don't know, that is a walk, right? That is not a run, right? That's a decently speedy walk. I mean, maybe it's not, I wouldn't describe it as a fast walk, right? That's an
Yeah.
average walking sort of pace, and so they had to let me on. They couldn't really kick me out, right? There's no tryout. So there I was. And as far as the races are concerned, a lot of those races, believe it or not, they do let those races carry on, right? You have thousands of people entering. Some people get hurt during the race, but still want to finish. Some people are coming into those races with disabilities. Some of them are very, very senior, right? You have people 80 years old, 90 years old running these races
Right.
sometimes. So they keep those races open for quite a long time, and they do let people finish. They have cutoffs, where they have to reopen streets or reopen the park. But generally speaking, they allow a lot of time. They do allow a lot of time. I would say even for a slow walk, you can join those races and still not be given the boot and kicked out.
So, at what point did you kind of start making progress from your 15-minute time?
Yeah, so right from the start, it started as a point of embarrassment. Like, I don't want to be last. So here I am, and here's this other kid that's slightly faster than me, and I don't want to be at the level of slowed down at this point. And also keep in mind, I had a sort of the relationship with my mother was very estranged in that sort of regard, where I was not doing this because I was passionate about running. I hated running. I even to this day, when people ask me, "Oh, I run and it clears my head," it's like, "Really?" Because for me, it's felt like just drowning the whole time. That's what running has felt like to me. It's like, hey, you're getting really good at that drowning thing. It's it's exhausting, and I don't see how anybody could enjoy it, but certainly people do. But my interface with running was just, here you are running this 15-minute mile, and here's this other, let's say, morbidly obese kid on the track team that maybe he joined for some development reasons. That now in my mind is, okay, it's me against that person. It's me against the person who's running as slow as me. And hey, if I could just not be last, that's an accomplishment, right? Right there. That's already like something to be, hey, we're not all waiting on me now. We're waiting on that other person. And then because of this sort of confrontation a little bit with my mother, and, to be fair to my mother, she wanted the best for me at that age. She didn't, she wanted me to see my full potential and everything else. For me, it became, okay, so you're not the slowest person on the team, but you're still not really healthy. This is still not a healthy person to be. You're maybe at that age, 100 pounds and, 5'8", 5'9", I was a tall kid, and you're running as slow as somebody who is, severely overweight or very clearly not healthy.
Yeah.
This is not really the endpoint we want to be at. And this is still a sign that muscularly you're not developed correctly, right? You're not there, because if you had the correct muscular development for someone your size, you should be flying past these people who are obese and have other problems. And then it became a point of, I don't want there to be any confusion about this. I want to be recognized as good at this, right? And to reiterate, no enjoyment, never enjoyed it, never liked 1 second of it. But my mental state was, I need to be undeniably good at this to justify me not being in the therapies that I'm being pushed to go into.
Yeah.
And that mentality definitely carried me a very long way, because I think my peers at that age, being 10, 11, 12 years old, maybe at the top end, 13 years old, they were not, they were running because they enjoyed the sport. They were running because maybe it made them good in a different sport, right? So they're running because they think they'll be a better soccer player, for example.
Right.
Or they're running, I mean, I think even some of those kids, they just weren't able to get picked up at school during the time that, so their parents couldn't pick them up and they needed to do an after school program. So it was sort of like I was going into the situation of, hey, the person next to me, I need to prove that I'm way better than you. And the person next to me is going into the situation going, yeah, I just think this is a good thing to do, right?
Yeah.
So to be fair, they didn't have the competitive drive the way I had it at that age, because of what the consequences of that were for me. But nonetheless, I got very, very fast, I would say very, very quickly. 6th grade, coming onto the team, I want to say it was a 15-minute mile, but I'm sure there were instances where I didn't finish. I'm sure there were instances where it was worse than that, maybe even a little bit better towards the end. By the time I was in the 8th grade graduating, I was at the Armory and at these events. My mile time was 5 minutes and 10 seconds. So the personal development I had was just unheard of. I mean, at that age, we were sort of looking at, like, funnily enough, the college I ended up going to, for example, just to put that time in perspective, the college cross country team that I could have been a part of while during my college years, there were very few athletes running the speed that I was running in the 8th grade, right? And of course, they've had way more time to train. They're in physically grown bodies, right? It just, to me, was the extent of, I need to be dominant in this sport. I need to be overwhelmingly good. And because of the confrontation I even had, I ran a very goofy sort of looking run, right? I didn't run like a normal looking child, right? My hands had a very floppy tone to them, right? I was not muscularly developed, even in like small elements of just my hands and my arms and my shoulders and everything. And so I wasn't the prettiest looking runner. And I got called out on that from a young age. And I had my coach come over to me. I had my mother come over to me and say, hey, you're running and your hands are just kind of bouncing up and down. You're not firm when you're running. You're not, they'd advise you to keep your hands like this or to keep your hands clenched, right? Trying to keep it firm, to be giving long strides and everything. And even that I took personally, right? I took it personally that someone was looking at my form and had critiques in regards to that. And so my mental state was, now I have to run fast, and I also need to put a priority in not looking like I'm really having a hard time, which was, I would say, another step that my peers were just not, they were not in that mental state. They had no reason to be. And so, my sort of attitude was, I'm going to run, I'm going to be very competitive. Maybe I won't win because I understand the sort of position I'm coming from, but I'm gonna look like this is very easy for me. And when I'm running next to people and when I'm seen from stands or when I'm seen towards the finish line, I need to look like I just strolled in the park just now and it was like this effortless sort of thing. So I would run without my mouth open was a big thing for me, right? So I'd keep my mouth closed while I'm running so as to not look like I'm panting, which
Mhm.
again, I don't think strategically is a good strategy for anybody if you're running. I think when you're running, breathe through your mouth. That's how you get more oxygen, right? But I was a firm believer if I just breathe in through my nose while I'm running, you can't tell that I'm dying inside, that I'm drowning, right? And so psychologically, it put me in a position of just like, I need to be strong. I need you to know that I'm strong. And I need to be validated in what I do in that regard from my parents, from coaches. It's a matter of proving it internally, proving it externally. Yeah, and that was my attitude in regards to really the sports that I engaged in, specifically running. It carried into basketball, I would say, because I really did love basketball. But yeah, that was sort of I guess the beginning of my adult fitness life and sort of understanding adult bodies and getting through in a lot of ways.
Nah, when you compare yourself to the other kids, I mean, that's like the entire point that I'm trying to get across from this podcast, and it's the reason that I speak to quite a kind of niche type of person such as yourself, the people who have gone through the really shit times, but used it to like overcome something, right? And become a better version of themselves. This actually reminds me of something I was listening to earlier today. I've spoken about it before on the podcast. I listened to this podcast called Modern Wisdom with a British guy called Chris Williamson. And unfortunately, I've forgotten the name of the guest that he had on. But he's got this guest who talks about the kind of way he frames it is for a lot of people, life happens to them, but for a very select few, they happen to life. So a way that, in fact, I spoke about this to Eric Ruth, from the first episode. There's this kind of victim mentality that a lot of people kind of portray, and I'm guilty of having done it in the past as well, where something bad happens to us or in our life or even to other people around the world, and they just kind of say like, there's nothing I could have done about that it sucks to be me, and therefore I'm justified in nihilistic, for example. But it's the very select few who decide that they are going to happen to life, that thing happens to them, and they say, good, I'm gonna make something come of this. And that's exactly what you were saying. Like, to the other kids, it's probably just, as you say, something to do after school when they're waiting to get picked up. I should probably start running to lose weight or whatever. To you, it was like personal. It was like, I have to
Yeah.
beat that guy so that I'm not just, the guy at the back of the pack, right?
Right.
It's,
Yeah,
go
I
on.
would even say further, right? Like for me, it's always when I look at people's behavior, even when I looked at it as a personal trainer, it was always this carrot and stick, right? It's the carrot in front of you, the stick behind you, right? So what are you running from? What are you running towards? If you're not running from something or towards something, you're not running. And I think in a lot of cases, both as an athlete and as a personal trainer, when that was my role, the why is so crucial, right? Because in a lot of ways, I don't think that my situation is special, except for the fact that I had some challenges that were worth running away from.
Mhm.
And for me, I view myself, I'm probably as healthy as I really could be at this age, right? I think there are some things I could do to really like straighten myself out and correct, right? We all have little dietary changes and little, adjustments we need to make as we get older, but most people aren't really running from anything, and most people aren't really running towards anything. I mean, they're sort of stuck in this middle where I think they can validate what they're doing by there not being sort of anything negative behind it or anything positive ahead of it. And so when something has meaning to you, you're going to beat the people that it doesn't have meaning to every time, right? And one thing I allude to is I ask, where is the person's pride, right? Suppose you're a phenomenal singer, for example. Suppose you're a phenomenal singer and you go to your local karaoke event and someone else just came before you and they're really good, right? And so now you're getting on stage and your mentality is, hey, I have to sing my heart out. I have to be great at this. Otherwise, on some level, I'm not going to be the best one at this karaoke event. And I'm supposed to be a professional and I should be better than everybody at the karaoke event. And so now when that person is singing, they're singing because they're proud of what they can do. And to have it turn out negatively would be a blow to their ego. Whereas if I ever go to sing at a karaoke event, I'm going because I enjoy hanging out with my friends and I'm well aware I don't sing. So I won't take it personally if the next guy gets on it is better than me, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with athletics, right? I mean, when I was running cross country, there was something that it represented. There was an ego attached to it. There was something that I needed to prove in order to be, I had to be better than my counterparts. I just had to. And then even when I got into high school, it was sort of the same mentality where, I basically what happened for me in high school, I'll sort of, I guess, jump into that. I wanted to play on the high school basketball team. It was like a really big goal of mine. I love basketball. Wasn't ever fantastic at the sport. Wasn't like particularly amazing, right? But I just loved it as a middle schooler. And so when I tried out for the basketball team, I showed up and I spoke to the coach and I said, "Hey, look, I want to try out for your team. I'm really excited. I really want to play." He happened to be my gym teacher, right? Because the way high school is, right? And he said to me, "Yeah, just come to tryouts. We'll see where you land and can't make any promises. Best of luck." Right? I was like, "Okay, it's fair enough. He can't just put me on the team because I really want to be on the team, right?" And there was a class that was essentially a running class. It was called Walk, Jog, Run. And my teacher had said, we get to pick our classes, which we could have either done that semester some other class or Walk, Jog, Run. Which Walk, Jog, Run was like if you got stuck not getting into the other class, you ran around the track for a while, right? It wasn't fun. Nobody liked Walk, Jog, Run, right? But I said, I'm going to sign up for that intentionally. Why? Because I need the coach to see athletically what I'm capable of. I need him to understand. Maybe he'll see me run and maybe that'll score me some points with the basketball coach. And so I ran around the track. I did exactly what I was sort of taught myself, which was you run fast, you keep your mouth closed, you make this look like it's effortless, right? You want to just be looking like a feather in the wind, just flying through. Even if you're just torturing yourself, mentally you have to get over that. He saw me in this class and he said, "Yeah, I'll put you on the basketball team." Because in his mind, I think he could just tell this guy might not even be good at the sport, but he's just a mean looking guy. He's tough, and that was sort of what I leaned into in high school was just, hey, look, I might not be, the best athlete on the team, but I'll be mean. I'll just be nasty. I'll just shove you out of the way and just get involved and I'll fall down the floor 15 million times and that's okay because, what you're trying to prove is maybe that you're really great at basketball. And what I'm trying to prove is that these things that I had overcome in my lifetime are just cannot be witnessed, right? They can't even be recognized. I'm trying to be someone that was completely unrecognizable from where I was in middle school and elementary school. And, going to that, it's like, again, it's like, what's your carrot and stick? Why do you show up to the basketball game? Hopefully to play basketball. I mean, for me, it wasn't really like that. There was a lot of other reasons I was doing that.
Yeah. I'm just going to steal something that I heard on another podcast. There was a study where they had a mouse or a rat in like a maze. They timed it. They like wafted in the scent of cheese from the destination point it had to find. And then they timed it to see how long it would take, and it took however long it took. And then with the second test, they did the scent of the cheese at the destination point, and then they wafted in the sound of a cat from behind it. Its speed increased because, as you say, not only is it running to something, but it also has that kind of thing behind it that it has to run away from. I also have to say, because you've said a few things now that really remind me of David Goggins. Are you familiar?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit of them, but I haven't done a deep dive. I think I heard him in a couple podcasts, but I haven't had a deep dive on David Goggins yet.
It's like the most motivational, inspirational guy there is. Like, I'm not going to go into his story, but there was just some things such as he did buds, so he did Hell Week to get into the Marines, and there's this thing that they have to do. Something I can't remember. It's been a while since I read his book now, but it was something like they have to lie down in the water, and then they have to get up and they do something with a boat. They have to like lift over their heads, and it's absolute torture for all the cadets that are doing it. Hence it being called Hell Week, right? And all the other guys were like crying and just wanting to quit. He could see that like the instructors were watching, and he was like, "Fuck you! I'm not going to let you like see me at my worst." Kind of like you when you were running. and you wanted to show the like the basketball coach or the gym teacher that you've got the athleticism. You're going to show them how that, and again, you're going to show them that you're not drowning while you're trying to run. You're going to keep your mouth closed and make it look like it's easy, right? And he did the same sort of thing. So he started singing while he was going through all this stuff, and apparently it really annoyed the instructor. So I just had to say just reminded me of him.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really I know I had the idea of singing while I was running. I never had that idea.
So the question I had was, so you were talking about your trying out for the basketball team, right? So did your walk, jog, run thing impress the coach enough to get on the basketball team?
Basically, yeah. I mean, it's funny because I went over him at the beginning of class and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in joining the team," and he said, "Yeah, yeah, come to tryouts like everybody else," sort of an answer. And then I did the running around the track. I pretty much ran for the whole 45-minute period just as fast as I really could, pacing myself or whatever. And then he says to me, he goes, "Oh, we'll have practice after school today. If you want to come, you're more than welcome to just join practice if you want to sit in on it." I was like, "Absolutely." And I was the only one that got invited before tryouts. And so when tryouts came, speaking to the kids in the basketball team, I was like, "Man, I really hope I make it." And they're like, "Dude, you're the only one here who's not, you're the only guy here, so you'll be fine. Like, don't worry about it." And tryouts came and went, and they posted results, and I made it on the team as a freshman. It was a varsity basketball team, and I was able to get on as a freshman, which was amazing.
Did you play, or were you one of those bench
Oh, I
players?
was a bench warmer up until probably my senior year. Maybe I think my junior year I started to get some play in there. But even when I did play, I was never like a leading scorer or anything like that. I was never some super duper player or anything. But I was always very quick and very tough. Was really like
Hmm.
So my role was always coming in. It was coming off the bench and just bringing sort of a jolt of energy to the team. And
Right.
I was really, when I played, I was at the center of so many, like, back and forth to the other team, so many fights and so many, always kind of grinding in there and trying to work my way in. But I grew very early, so coming in my freshman year, I was 6 feet tall, and leaving high school, I was 6 feet tall. So I didn't grow an ounce between my freshman year and my senior year, which hurt me. But yeah, I mean, I was always just a very grindy sort of player. And again, it was never really, basketball was about basketball in the sense that I love basketball, but it was more about, hey, I need third party person to see I'm sort of normal, right? It was very much
Right.
trying to prove normalcy, which is again, I don't know, I don't really think many kids my age were really thinking about it in that sort of way. You know what I mean? Kids wanted to shoot the ball and play basketball, and I was there for a totally different reason. And coming into that freshman year, I was mercilessly picked on. I was definitely the recipient of some bullying because, again, I was coming in as a skinny little kid and freshman on varsity basketball team, and still ran kind of awkwardly, and still had sort of so a pretty awkward kid. I mean, I wasn't really too well socialized as a kid. And it started again. It basketball pushed me in another direction where I was very often the fastest one on the team, but I was never the strongest. And training in the off season was very much like, hey, I have to be physically stronger. I'm not going to allow I'm not going to allow myself to be pushed by just kids who are, you're coming in, you're 14 years old and you're playing with kids who are 18. I mean, it's totally normal to just be bullied, right? It's totally
Yeah.
normal to just be like, this guy is huge and I'm not, and I'm just going to be moved out of the way. But even that was tough for me to tolerate because, again, on the opposite end, I had very oftentimes my parents in the audience. My father went to pretty much every one of my games, and I didn't want to be viewed as the guy that's constantly on the floor, constantly getting rolled over. And it drove me to be, in my off season, very, very fitness oriented, very much
Right.
lifting weights, very much, going to the park and doing a lot of calisthenics as a kid before I could even get a gym membership. And I could tell you funny stories about the gym membership even. I had told my parents, hey, I really want to get a gym membership. I really want to do this. And my mother was a little bit like skeptical because she thought, hey, there's weights there. You're a young kid. You're 14 years old. There's like a real chance you just hurt yourself, right? Like we don't really want that, and I debated about it forever. I said, please let me join the gym. Please let me join the gym. Please let me join the gym. Parents were like, no, you can't. No, you can't. No, you can't. And finally, being that I was 6 feet tall and I looked like someone that might have been 16 or 17 at 14, I just walked into the gym with every dollar I had at the time. And I said, look, I want to sign up. And they're like, yeah, sure. Just fill out these papers, whatever. And they had told me previously, if you're under, I think it was under 15 or 16 years old, you need to have a parent consent or whatever.
Right.
But they handed me the papers this time. I filled everything out. I wrote the wrong year for the date I was born on purpose, right? Made myself look a little bit older, and he asked me on the way out before checking my birth date. He goes, "Oh, you're 18, by the way, right?" I said, "Yep," and I just put on my headphones and I walked out, tried to get out of there as quickly as possible. Like, "Hey, you already took my cash. It's over." And it was hilarious because I now the issue was how do I actually get to the gym without getting caught going to the gym, right? Which was the secondary problem. I got the membership now. Now, how do I actually physically get there without getting in trouble? And I lied to my parents. I told them, "Oh yeah, basketball starts an hour and a half later now. The girls team needed to practice before us," which was true. They did need to practice before us, but it didn't take. I didn't need to be coming home at that late at night. And so I'd go from school and go to basketball, and then instead of taking the train home and showing up home, I take the train to the gym, work out for an hour or two, and then go home. And it got to the point where I can't come home early now, right? It's a little bit of a problem because if I came home early, it'd be like, what happened? Was basketball canceled today? It couldn't have been canceled because you're home late enough that, you would have known at 2:30 when you got out of school, 3 o'clock. And I just basically just forced myself to be in the gym every day. It was just nowhere else to be. And I got stronger and stronger. And the next year I was trying to get my parents to pay for the gym. And I said, "Hey, I'm getting stronger. You think you can get me a gym membership? I'd really like to sign up." And they said, "No, we still don't think you're ready." And I had to bite my tongue and not let them know I had already been in the gym for the last year working out every day. It's like, I had to continue the lie of just, yeah, I guess if you say I'm not ready, whatever, I'll just bite my tongue and not say, "What do you mean I'm not ready? I've been there last year."
So
My dad is
what
just totally strong. So
what were you doing for 2 hours a day in the gym at that age? Like, presumably, did you have any idea what you were doing? Did you have a
no,
trainer or
not
anything?
not really. I mean, by that age I had the internet, so I was able to Google things the best I could, and
Right.
I was able to watch the guys who were on steroids in the gym and just be like, "Hey, you're super big and strong. What do you do?" And really that's how I started. I just walked in, I saw some guy and, I'll never forget it. He was benching something, I think he was benching 4 plates, right? So he's benching 405 pounds. And he looked like a young guy. And I said, "Hey, how are you doing this? Right? What is like what's going on?" And he just totally candidly said, "Yeah, oh yeah, I'm on a ton of steroids, right? Like you don't be like me. Like like yeah, I'm on steroids." And it was like so eye-opening to me. And I was like, wow. And then but I said to myself, "Hey, look, I don't know anything about really the gym or any of the stuff, but that guy's chest is huge and he's doing the bench press. And so I'm going to do the bench press a bunch." And, the way my introduction to fitness is just let's look at what those big guys are doing and let's just try to do our best version of whatever that is. Right. And
Right.
some of it worked. I luckily never hurt myself. You know what I mean? I never
Wow.
really had an injury from going to the gym. I had plenty of injuries from basketball, but not from going to the gym. Luckily, it was very, very safe. And but yeah, and it got to the point where I'd be going to the gym a lot of days sore. Right? I mean, it's not common to really go work out for 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, but I had nowhere else to be. And New York winters are very cold, and that's when basketball season is. So it's like, where are you gonna go? Right? The gym is open. It's 15 degrees outside. You're not gonna hang out outside for 2 hours at 9, 10 o'clock at night, right? You're not gonna do that. So, go to the gym and do that. It was sort of just like by nature of wanting to be stronger and half having to keep up a lie that I was busy. I just ended up in a spot where I was there every day and gradually learning and figuring it out. And it was funny because I came back to high school my sophomore year, and the all of the working out was just visible at that point. I think
Right.
I was young. I would credit my genetics some to just being able to at that age put on some weight a little bit quickly. And I came back that sophomore year. Actually, it was my sophomore year going into my junior year, really, where I was physically, visibly much, much stronger over that 3, 4 month period of summer vacation and end of season sort of area. And by that point, I had people ask me like, "Man, what are you eating? Like, what are you doing? Like, what's happening?" And by that point, I was no longer getting picked on. I had become just a totally unrecognizable person, I think, to really where my roots were from, right? It's just totally not. And I had no problem with that. I was totally like, yeah, let's pretend that the childhood that I had and where I came from just doesn't exist. Because I think I still had that mentality of, hey, I'm really strong, and it's also important for me to show you that this was not hard for me to do, which is a total lie, right? I mean, I was working out every day, and it was brutally hard. I was force feeding myself food and pushing myself really hard. But coming from where I came from, it was important that two things. Number one, I wasn't getting picked on. And number
Hmm.
two, that I made whatever I did look like a seamless, easy thing for the observer. Which, I mean, as an adult, I don't see how it serves any purpose, right? I've kind of, I would say, adulted past that point where now I like to be honest with people and say, look, this is going to be exactly as difficult as it's going to be. I'm not going to make it sound easier. I'm not going to make it sound harder, right? This is what it takes, and I definitely went through a personality shift, like a social shift. And all of that was really because I just had forced myself to go to the gym. And I guess that's why I'm on the podcast now, because it's to me, it's not just the gym in that regard. I had a similar realization financially even where, I viewed it like as embarrassing to be working out in private. I viewed it as embarrassing to be panting and to be, really like having a difficult time. But the reality is there's nothing embarrassing about that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with going through like a really hard time. There's absolutely nothing wrong with, hey, you work a day job that you have a real great career and you want to be seen as professional, but at nights you also wait tables. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's I would say a lot of men out there who are saying, oh, I'm this professional person. I'm not going to be seen waiting at a table and, waiting at a table at the local restaurant because what happens if my coworker comes in there and sees me waiting tables? It's like, oh, and so you're embarrassed about being seen working hard because you have goals that are maybe above what your colleagues have, and we fall into this wanting to make things seem easy, right? So you have a guy who
Yeah.
wants to have a nice spot and wants to own things, and he doesn't want to say, I worked tremendously hard for this. This might not even been worth the work I put into it, which is a secondary conversation, right? Of just, hey, there are some things we do in life we worked really hard because we want to attain, and when we get there, it wasn't worth the effort. And if you have to give advice, even though on the outside in it looks like, wow, this guy's got it all put together. There are some things that I can say even in my own workout life. Hey, there were things I did that weren't worth it. It wasn't worth it to exercise in certain ways that I ended up exercising, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So what did you eat during that period? Did you know, like, this is how many calories I should be eating? It should be high protein.
Oh,
Or were you
yeah,
just like
funny
anything?
enough, I had no knowledge of so I would say from ages up until I was maybe 17, 18, I had no knowledge of what was appropriate to eat. I got all of the wrong advices, 100%. Hey, just as an experiment for yourself, just look up on YouTube some of some of the advices you'll hear on there for diet. It's just outrageous. But I was a big fan at the time of a guy called Kali Muscle, who was just
Yeah, man, I know him.
he's getting older now and he looks a lot different than when I was a kid, but
Yeah.
super strong and super huge. And his advice was just, oh, we're going to mash all this garbage food together and you're going to eat this giant thing and you're going to get super strong. It was just the worst advice, just terrible advice for health, terrible advice for actually achieving anything, just awful advice. And I took it like, oh, that guy's huge. I got to listen to him, and, I was doing all these things. I used to go to Chipotle a lot of times and I'd order a burrito. I'd eat the whole burrito sitting down, eating there, right? And I'd be full, but I'd say, you know what, I'm going to eat another one because everybody else is eating one. I should eat two. And if I'm going to eat two, I'll be bigger than all those guys. And so I'd go back up to the front and I'd eat another one. And I'd be sitting there just shoving food down, trying to put on any weight that I possibly could. For me, it didn't matter if it was fat or muscle. Didn't matter because I thought, hey, if I get fat, I'll burn that off. Like, no problem. I'm trying to gain that muscle. And it was what we commonly call now as a dirty bulk was the mentality.
Right.
Which was like, again, I'd go to McDonald's and get 40 McNuggets, right? Just order 2 of the 20 pieces and just sit there and just agitatedly be eating, just like, I got to finish this. Terrible, right? I mean, I'm health-wise, it's just totally the wrong things to be doing, right? But nonetheless, it was just like getting food down, and then working out intensively hard, working out really, really hard, really, really hard. And at that age, I guess with the metabolism and everything, I was able to sort of navigate that in some sort of way. But yeah, I'm not too proud to say that was awful advice that I received. I would never give that advice.
Mhm.
And even furthermore, it didn't need to be that hard. We didn't need to make fitness this incredibly hard thing to be doing. It was that way because of the information that my 16, 15-year-old brain had access to. But
So
yeah, I mean,
considering you at that age, right? 15, 16, 17, 18 is like the party years at school, right? Due to your condition, did you have to stay away from like alcohol? Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
I guess
And
you
I
didn't
didn't, I
join the party scene then.
no, no. I actually, when I got into college, I mean, when I was in high school, I would say alcohol wasn't super common. It was sort of there, but not like, because it was illegal until you're 21, right? And so
Yeah.
I saw it more my sophomore, junior, senior year, even freshman year. I didn't really get much of it. I mean,
Okay.
pot, I've always seen pot around my life. I mean, I think the first time I was offered pot, I might have been in the 6th grade, but again, never engaged in that. My mentality was just like, hey, these neurologists told me that this was actually a side part of it was neurologist told me, hey, you outgrew this seizure disorder when you were a kid, but there's a lot of development that happens in your teenage years with your brain, where even to the point where even if you're not on drugs or not drinking, there is a chance that because of the way your brain grows, that this may become a problem again. You have to be prepared for getting through the ages of 16 to 21, not knowing, hey, you might have a seizure again. And
Okay.
so that to me was enough to just be like, yeah, I'm not touching alcohol. That's not in the picture. It's not worth it. And I had vocally said at that time, if I ever had to engage with those problems that I engaged with in the past, there was parts of me that thought I wouldn't continue to live if I had to deal with those things. It was just
Hmm.
the idea of drinking alcohol was so clearly resounding no that through my years of college, I didn't drink. Through those years, and you can imagine people are partying and people going out clubbing and all stuff. And I did, some partying. I got involved for work. I was kind of doing some promoting stuff and trying to find any way to make a couple bucks, but I never drank, never smoked. I stayed away from that really as much as humanly possible. Tried not to have it in my room. I was very, very strict on things to the point where in college I had a resurfacing of that feeling a little bit like an outcast very oftentimes of you don't have many, peers that are saying, yeah, I'm just non-alcoholic, right?
Hmm.
Which, interestingly enough, when I go on social media now, I'm starting to see a little bit of a surgence of that in the younger group. Some people are being really abstinent from all of that in college, which is just
Yeah.
that's incredible. I wish everybody was like that. But for me, it was like, yeah, we just avoid these things. And what we're going to do also, in addition to avoiding these things, I started to learn a little bit more about nutrition, started
Hmm.
to get a little bit better of a workout routine for myself, started to understand, really more about fitness in general. During the time I had gotten my NASM certification, which for, you might not know, and this, listeners might not know, it's the National Academy of Sports Medicine. I got my certified personal trainer license, studied for that, took that test while I was in college. And then in addition to that, I got all types of continuing education done. So prenatal care, postnatal care, corrective exercise and nutrition and just every textbook I get my hands on for continuing education, I figured, this is a notch in my belt. It's going to help me. It's going to help my clients. This is just information that's great to just know, and I leaned very much into the fitness side in college. I was the fitness guy. I was the workout guy. I leaned into that portion of a personality because it was just easy to turn down alcohol and not make it seem like, hey, it's because I had this condition as a kid. It was easy to say, no, I'm fit and that's just what I do. And it helped in a lot of ways. I think a lot of times even, I think when we're all growing up, we have these moments of, oh, it is this high school sweetheart and breakup or a college girlfriend and breakup or there's something that happens, events that just unfold in life as you get older, right? And fitness became this thing that I just very much leaned on. It was
Hmm.
like really just medicine for everything. It was medicine
Yeah.
for my social situation, for my interpersonal situation with friends and work and everything. And even in addition to that, it was just a place to really just let loose and kind of exist. I don't know if that really makes a lot of sense.
100%. I, I said this on a previous episode, but when I was diagnosed with depression, the first thing the doctor prescribed was the pills and the counseling, the therapy. But they also said, like in the same breath, go to the gym every single day, go for a walk every single day, and I did, and I'm still doing it. And I mean, it's difficult when I've got the kids. Like at weekends, I can't go to the gym because I've got the kids, but I'm still going 5 days a week. And there are certain days where you wake up and I don't know, you're just not 100% there. You're not in a good
Yeah,
space for whatever. And those are the days I kind of look forward to them. I kind of enjoy them because I know what I have to do. I've got to get up and I've got to go out and I've got to hit the gym, and you feel so much better afterwards. It's medicine, as you say. And
absolutely.
the the thing you were talking about, the college, this is an idea that I've been hearing about recently, where they describe it as like the lonely chapter in your life. And I'm kind of going through it at the moment, but I'm 36, so I'm kind of late to the party. I'm going through this whole self-improvement, personal development thing that a lot of people, well, really no one knows about. Like no one knows that I'm hitting the gym every day. No one knows that I'm doing this podcast. No one knows all the stuff that I'm doing behind closed doors. But I'm kind of socially, I'm just kind of distancing myself from all the stuff that my friends are doing because I'm focusing on all these other things. And it's really impressive to be able to do it at such a formative age as you did, right? Late teens, early 20s is probably our peak in terms of physical attributes. And if you're able to ignore the the social pressures to go partying and drinking and the drugs and the girls and just focus on working out or whatever your craft is, that's incredible. Like I had a friend back in those days, like 16 to like 18, where we would all go out and do the partying thing, and he just worked. He was never at any of the parties. He just worked all the hours he could after school and weekends, and he put all that money aside and saved and saved and saved. And then when we left school, he bought a house. He bought his first house when he was like 18. And
Wow.
now, like, he just kept doing it, kept doing it, kept doing it. And now he's just bought like a 4-bedroom detached. It's massive. It's a really gorgeous house.
Wow.
But
Wow.
because he's always just focused on that stuff. And now we're all together, we're all friends, we're all hanging out, going to the pub or whatever. And it's not like we're looking back on those days saying, "Oh, you missed out on this one night, this crazy party." Like, no one remembers that stuff. But
Yeah.
you remember the work you put in because you've got the things to show for it now, right?
Right. Right.
Uh,
Absolutely.
so okay, so you finished high school, went to college, got all of those accreditations, as you say, and then actually before we go there, I just want to. Do the guys when you came back, like after whatever break it was from school, and you came back and you were this like different guy, all big, were the guys at school the same guys that knew you when you were, you know, scrawny, like years prior?
Well, some they knew me from high school where I was scrawny but not unathletic, right? Because in middle school I had been, gaining sort of that athletic physique, running constantly with, with cross country running. And the high school I went to was in a totally different neighborhood than where I went to middle school.
Ah,
And it was funny. I was always in sort of like this odd. I was positioned very oddly, if that makes sense, because, like I said, like you have this balance of coming into middle school. I was gifted. I was gifted in math, right? Is what they described it as, right? Gifted. They toss that word around a lot, and you know, what I mean, everybody's gifted, but I was coming into fifth grade. I had taken a math test that I had been in the 98th percentile for the people my age in math. And so it was undeniable that like, okay, I have some math brain there. And so coming into middle school, whatever those tests were that I took, they put me in the gifted program. I mean, whatever. Gifted as a sixth grader, it's nonsense. But so I had been in this weird position where it's like kind of physically needing special accommodations, also advanced in certain, advanced mentally in certain ways. I think math came easy to me just because, unironically, because of the situation I was in, right? It's like math is very, very concrete. It was very concrete at that age. It was unjudgeable and things like that. I think that's where I was, is constantly in fear of getting judged. By the time I got in high school, nobody really, I think there was only one kid in my whole high school who went to school with me in elementary school and could see a tangible difference. And I became pretty good friends with that person. He was one of my best friends throughout high school, but I really made an effort to not, I was happy to go to a high school where the people from my elementary school didn't know me. I was happy that
right.
nobody saw this transition, and I did my best to maintain that, right? I tried my best to not really just identify with who I was in a ridiculous sort of sense. Like I looked at it as like, hey, there was moments in my life where I was weak and I felt like I was picked on and sort of I was the recipient of the more negative sides of human nature, I felt. And then in high school, I was now being the recipient of the more positive sides of human nature, where, kids
Mm,
were kind of like looking up to me and they're saying, what do I do? And I had like my own little workout class, and I was happy with where I stood, stature wise, that I didn't really want people to know where I came from. Just to me, it just looked like, hey, if you see how much work this took me and you saw where I came from, then I don't know. I didn't want to be victimized in any sort of way because of that, as ridiculous as it sounds. And by the time I got into college, I mean, it was an assorted bunch, but I was a totally different person than I was as a kid, and I recognized
mhm,
that. I recognized that, like, hey, whatever your impression of me was when I was in, 9 years old, 10, it just is like totally doesn't matter. This is who I am as an adult. And again, I was discreet about my life situations up until that point. But as I became a personal trainer, that was me coming out socially, right? It was not, because personal trainer, is really a sales job, right? Everybody gets into that job thinking like, oh, I'm fit and I'm gonna, people that come up to me and say, how did you get so fit? And I'm gonna be like, yeah, we do all these workouts. It's like, no, that's not what it is. That's not the job, right? The job is you meet people in the gym. They probably have no interest in personal training, and you have to get them interested in personal training, right? You have to sell it to them, right? It's a sales job, and sales jobs require just a level of communication that was just foreign to me at that time, right? I don't approach people, cold approach people and go, hey, how's your workout going? And hey, we could correct this. And noticed you doing that. These were things I just would never in a million years do. I just don't reach out to people I don't already know. And because I had to with my job, it kind of took me out of my shell and said, no, you have to introduce yourself to people and meet people and things like that. And by that point, I started to recognize, oh, I have a leg up from a lot of these other trainers. Because if you walk into your gym and you see personal trainers, for the most part, they might have stories about being a little bit overweight, might have stories about being a little bit less than confident. They might have just been athletes their whole life. They might have been a college athlete or a pro athlete that then became a personal trainer because they saw it as a natural stepping stone. But for me, I had clients that were disabled, right? Essentially just disabled clients. And I had no issue seeing where they were and relating to where they were. I had no issue just going, oh, I know where you are right now. I've been there, right? This is like, what I'm asking you to do is like next to impossible. This is going to be very, very hard. It's totally worth it. Totally worth it to do. And I got to experience, I had a client, even for example, would come talk to me about how she got bullied at work for being overweight, for example. I had another client that, there was a child who was, his teenage years. He had gone in, he was a perfectly healthy kid, and he'd gone in for a dive, sort of, jumping into not a lake, I don't know. It was like sort of like this, sort of in a mountain somewhere. It kind of jumped into water that was shallow, didn't realize it was shallow, ended up being paralyzed, right, for example. You have all of these cases, or there was another young kid that was looking to be a college athlete. There was a young girl that was looking to be a college athlete. We have all of these different people, and I can match them at the stage of life that they're in because of that job. I could go, okay, you're disabled. You know what it's like to not be able to do simple tasks. You're struggling with really fundamental things, and we're trying to get you to be normalcy. And then I also have, oh, you're an athlete. You've always been an athlete. You're a superstar, and we're trying to take you to the next level of athletics. And I could relate to both of those people because I understood what it was like to be in high school and really wanting to play college basketball and thinking, oh, I need a recruiter to come see me. And I also understood what it's like I'm getting picked on every day. This sucks, and it cannot continue, right? And these people were spending thousands of dollars for training. This was not like, oh, I'll pay $20 an hour. It's like, no, training in the gym, it costs a lot. I think the cheapest program that I would even sell was close to $500 a month. And part of it was like, we don't want to be, I never wanted to be a salesperson. I never wanted to be like cramming anything down anybody's throat trying to get them to buy something. I wanted to be more of like a beacon for people to come to. But by that point, I had been coming to terms with my own situation, my own story, to the point where, like you asked, I know I kind of went on a tangent here, but I didn't really ever get approached about where I was, and I didn't really care if I did. And I wasn't going to bring it up, but I also wasn't going to deny it. I was starting to come to terms with just who I was, what my situation was, and where I happened to be. Gradually, I kind of stepped out of that, maybe, and sort of said like, look, fitness is just one aspect of life. And I had other financial struggles that I also wanted to step out of. And that was sort of the shift in my adult years of, I came into college going, I'm the fitness guy. And I was the fitness guy for a long time, to a point where, so while I was in college, I started as a personal trainer. They gave me a title. They called me the elite trainer, which is just, we charge more money for training because you booked, right? Then it was, you're a lead instructor, which was just, okay, I'm managing a staff here. Then I was a fitness manager, which was, I'm managing a bigger staff, and it's more money and it's more this and all right. And all of that was great, and all of that was fun. And around COVID time, actually, gyms started getting closed down. I started to think to myself like, hey, I've mastered the fitness side of life. I'm fine with where I am in this regard. Financially, we need to make some changes. Things need to happen, progress financially. And so, yeah, fitness was kind of this thing that I never left behind. I always continue to work out. I'll always go to the gym. But we sort of like, if I have to say, I like the way I broke down my mindset was there's money, right? There's what you have and sort of that aspect of life and trying to keep that under control. There's your health, right? There's everything physically that's going on, what you eat, how you sleep, how much you work out. And at the tail end of that is sort of just being mentally okay, right? I mean, mental health, which we kind of separate from the other two. But I've very often found just the way, you were discussing how, fitness has kind of helped you pull out of that depression. I found that that mental health is so tied to physical health. It's
Yeah.
it's crazy, right? Whereas, your doctor, like you said, you got a prescription sort of pretty quickly on. I too struggled with what I would describe as depression. I was never diagnosed as depressive, but I would say that sunlight and exercise and
Yeah.
all of these things, they pull you out of it in a way that the science doesn't really understand, but that experientially a lot of people understand.
100%.
You know,
It's one I've heard from Andrew Huberman, I think, spoke about it, where again, he's a neuroscientist, so he knows exactly what it is. But yeah, there's something about a specific time as well. It's something like it has to be within the first 20 minutes or something of when you wake up.
wow.
Sunlight does something to you. Sunlight in the eyes directly. That sounds bad, but like even
No,
if
no,
you,
it makes sense.
but even if you go out and it's cloudy, overcast, like the UV rays are still there. That still counts as sunlight, and it does something
Wow.
positive to your body. Exercise, yeah. Again, I've mentioned this before. There's this subreddit that I always see on the front page called "Thanks I'm Cured." Have you seen that one?
And-
So this is the epitome of that victim mentality that I was talking about, where it's people who have depression and they get told how to overcome that depression, which is physical exercise, and then they go on Reddit and say, "Thanks, I'm cured," as if, like, in a sarcastic sense, as if it's some magical thing. So they'll go on there and they'll be like, "Oh, David Goggins said, go to the gym. Thanks, I'm cured. My doctor
Yeah,
said, go
right.
to the gym.
Right.
Thanks, I'm cured." And I see it all the time, and it's like I've been there before. As I said, I used to be that victim mentality, and I've done that whole, like, in my late teens. So my parents died when I was a teenager, so I went through depression then
Sorry to
as
hear that.
well. And I went through that victim mentality of everything sucks. It sucks to be me. Like, life happened to me, right? And I just let it
Right.
kind of be my excuse. So I get where they're coming from, but it's, as we've spoken about and you've clearly demonstrated, it's about taking those hard things and using them as fuel to, like, fuel to the fire to overcome all these things. And I mean, look at where you are now. Are you a private personal trainer, or are you
So,
in like a
so
gym?
and I guess this is a part of the reason why I'm sort of getting on podcasts now and starting to do this. This is the first podcast I've ever done. I am looking to start a channel soon, but I I actually left fitness as a profession. I kind of stepped aside from it. I wrote in my book a lot of ways on how to be successful. I was ended up being a manager at such a young age. This is now, I think, about 7 years ago that I got this job as more than that, even maybe 8 or 9 years ago that I was managing a gym. And keep in mind I'm 29 years old now, so like right out of my 20s, while I was still even in college, I was managing gyms and figuring this out. And what I realized is that industry, upward mobility wise, in a person to person sense, it doesn't go very far, right? It goes from managing a gym. You could theoretically open your own gym, but it requires a
Mhm.
lot of capital. It's a totally different set of responsibilities at that point, right? You don't open a gym because you love fitness. You open a gym because you love money, really. And you think that there's a niche and a spot in the market where you can get in. But the qualities about floor plans and laying this out and insurance and all of these things is not necessarily for the fitness lover, right? There's a lot of added
Yeah.
responsibility there. And I had a great passion about teaching trainers how to train, but even that to a point, right? Because I think that there are other added responsibilities with managing a team that weren't necessarily things that I wanted to do. And at the time, finances were very much so a problem, right? I was making good money as a personal trainer. I was doing great. There were other areas in my life that I didn't know how to budget. I didn't know how to save. I didn't know how to spend. I didn't know how to track. I didn't know how to invest, right? Most of these gym jobs, you're not going to get a 401k plan. You're not going to get an IRA set up. You're not, they're not going to help you with, definitely not going to be a pension. Forget about that. There's not going to be any sort of plan for you to retire, right? And so what I found is like the finance element was an aspect I was missing from my life. It's like, all right, I'm super fit, I'm super capable, I can work a bunch of hours, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing, right? And it's like, I'm sure in the process of, I'd say in my adult years now, it's even, the idea of there are going to be kids down the road, right? I want to have kids at some point in my life. It changes your perspective of, yes, we need to be fit, we don't need to be crazy, right? We need to be healthy. We don't need to be, you know, year round, you know, Mr. Bikini body, right? This is not what we're trying to do. There's other objectives, other priorities. So coming out, I was in college for business, you know, and it just sort of happened that COVID happened. I was not finished up with school yet because I had gone part-time. I had taken semesters off. I had done this because I thought that the gym was my future. I thought that that's where I was going. And so part of me was like, I don't need my business degree. It's no point. I'm already making money as a manager at a gym. I'm already making an honest salary. I don't I don't really need to finish up school. I'm not in a rush to do it, but I'll do it. And then what happened is COVID happened. All the gyms get closed down. They offer me a big unemployment check because that's what the government was doing at the time. If you lived, if you lived in New York and everything else, the unemployment check was quite nice. And school was still open. And so I said, okay, cool. I guess I'll just finish up school. There's nothing else really for me to do. What's the point of me going back to work if they're going to write me such a big unemployment check? I might as well finish up school then. And then I finished up school, and the market was different for these jobs when I got out of school, and it was a different sphere at that point in time, at the fitness wise. And at that point in time, I said, okay, I want to get a job related to what I went to school for in business. So I kind of put the gym on the back burner there. Not in a personal sense. Personally, I've always gone to the gym. I always continue to go. I think it's great. But in a profession sense, I wanted to learn more about money. I was really interested in just, hey, how do I arrive at the spot? I mean, because I think we all have a vision for the future, right? I mean, I think when you're young, especially, right? When you're 17, what's the dream, right? It's the dream is, for me, it was like six pack and awesome house and beautiful wife and kids and just like you're crushing every area of your life. And I was kind of looking at my situation at that age going, I'm crushing like 25% of this, and the other 75%, I'm like doing terrible. So I got to get that figured out. Ironically enough, or hilariously enough, it all came to a head when I was stepping out of work, and I realized I had no money. I realized I was completely broke, and I went to go buy a hot dog at 7-Eleven, and my card got declined, and I couldn't afford a $1.79 hot dog, and it was like, I don't know. I just realized at a moment in time, like, yeah, there's got to be some changes that got to get made, because even that is going to start to deteriorate my health, right? Even though you're going to settle and buy a hot dog because it's the cheapest thing you could find in the middle of the workday, right? And you're hungry and you're working out, and so my priorities sort of shifted, and that's as I was leaving the gym, I said to myself, I don't ever rule out me going back to working in the gym ever again. I think it was a great job, and I wanted to write down everything that I knew about working in the gym. I wanted to just hey, I'm going to want to remember how I did this job. Let me go ahead and just write this out. And I looked and I go, wow, this is like 40, 50 pages. This is crazy how much just stuff that I had bottled up in my head of just needing to keep into sort of in writing. And I looked at this and I go, I could write another 20 pages so that this is like understandable to a human that's not me, and just call this a book. And that's kind of just what happened. I didn't really ever wake up and go, I'm going to write a book. It started out with just like, here's all the stuff I know and I want to remember. And then, I could just explain this other stuff in like another 10 pages. And now we have like a 70, 80 page book that's like really like a handheld book, really just easy to read for, fourth grade, third grade reading level, just easy to get through and understand. So then I ended up, now I'm in a finance job and I'm sort of doing that. And, I don't dislike my job, and, no real problems with it. It pays the bills and it's helping me progress in the financial sense.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of where I am now. And, so fitness as a profession, it's not on the back burner. I'm kind of looking to inch my way back into it and do this strategically.
That must be
yeah.
such a saturated market nowadays,
Oh, yeah.
especially
Oh, yeah.
online. Like it was different for me growing up. I was there before the internet, and I was there when it came about. But now it's just like everyone's on the internet 24/7 because of our phones, and everyone is on these social media platforms, and everyone's an influencer, and fitness influencing is huge. So it must be so hard to gather decent following. I don't know how so many people manage to gather such a large following. It's crazy.
Yeah, a lot of it is also, so there's first person advantage, I would say, just being the first person to be things, right? Like, I think a really famous one was Bradley Martin. I don't know if you're familiar with that name, Bradley Martin, but he was one of the earliest people to have an Instagram that had a fitness related Instagram.
Okay.
And no doubt the guy is very sharp. The guy is, super athletic, and, he's a steroid guy, takes some steroids, whatever, who cares? He's in that industry. He chooses to do that. That's his choice. But because he was in Instagram so early, I mean, it's like Instagram came out, Bradley Martin was right there. He had that first person advantage where now to this day, it's like, yeah, you've kind of gained traction in such a way. Whereas like it's hard for another person to be another Bradley Martin. It's hard for another person to come out with their own fitness content because the first question you're going to ask is like, well, why are you more qualified than the other 3 million people who have a fitness, Instagram account? And so I'm sure there's a way to make money doing this online. I truthfully haven't figured it out. I it's kind of above my level.
I don't understand influencing. I'm not on any social media.
Yeah.
I just don't understand how people like record themselves and then put it on Instagram and then money happens. I don't
Yeah,
understand.
it's bizarre. I mean, they're selling things obviously and ad revenue and gear and stuff, and they're selling whatever equipment they're using, and I come at this even because when I was a personal trainer when this stuff was popular too, right? This wasn't so long ago that Instagram wasn't around and Facebook wasn't around and people weren't starting to get into this, and my view was just as a person who was a professional in this, going, okay, I got my licenses and all of these extra continuing education. I was very much by the book. This is how it gets done, right? How do we track your macros? How do we assign the amount of calories given? Your cardio, what should be your heart rate when you're doing cardio, right? What's the optimal target heart range, right? I was so into just the science that, I mean, I'd see people post things online and go, oh my God, this is, I can't watch this anymore. And then my clients would come to me and say, oh, well, I heard this, and that. And I had to be, okay, I understand you heard that. I understand there's a lot of bad stuff out there on the internet. The internet's a scary place when it comes to fitness advice. I mean, and even for me, right? Like I said earlier, I was a little bit of a victim to it, even myself early on,
Yeah.
but it in the whole landscape with that has changed. And, also in another sense, we've gotten very unrealistic about what is attainable, even fitness wise, I think is another problem in the community, right? So go online and some guy's telling you, oh, I did this. How did I do it? Kali muscle. Oh, I eat, hyphy mud. I get
Yeah.
coffee and soda and I mix it up and I have all this caffeine. It's like, this is terrible advice. But the guy is on an ungodly amount of steroids at the time, right? Something that would make any doctor, tremor a little bit and go, "Ooh, that's a little bit scary," right? And you as the observer just looking like, "Well, that guy's got tons of muscle. He certainly must know what he's talking about," right?
Mm.
And look, being that size, it's really two things, right? It's there's the steroid element, and what are you doing unhealthily to look healthy? Which is it's the biggest paradox, the biggest set of irony in the industry is like you have people who are severely unhealthy. Because they're severely unhealthy, they look tremendously healthy, right? Which sounds crazy, but the steroids aren't good for you, right? If you take
No.
steroids, there are a lot of terrible things that those steroids can do, ranging from just cosmetically, you have people with tons of acne and skin problems because of that,
Yeah.
to enlarged heart, right? To blood pressure problems, right? To fertility problems that they're not able to
Mm.
have children because of the sperm count. There are tons and tons of negative side effects of that. And if you're seeing the person on there, you're seeing the guy who took the steroids, got the hair treatment, try to get his skin under control. He does all of these chemically induced things that are just horrible. But then you're going, all right, that guy must give good fitness advice because he's got that beautiful six pack and huge shoulders, right? It's like, well, no, not at all. It's not really attainable for most people. It's not, the steroids is not attainable at all from, you can't do it, right? It's levels that your body can reach with steroids you just cannot do naturally, right? And
Yeah.
so as a professional, you are competing with that. You're competing with
Yeah.
that band space for here's Mr. Unhealthy claiming to be Mr. Healthy, and you're Mr. Healthy living the life that you preach, saying, hey, I'm going to do things by the book and stay healthy. And you're just not going to look the way those guys look, and you have to contend with that. And it's hard for your local trainer, right, to contend with
Yeah.
that. I mean, he's got to deal with that every day comparatively. And a lot of those trainers, they do end up on steroids because of that battle of comparison.
I think it's on the one hand, it's good that so many people are so in such good shape now, like in the public eye. So my ex fiance used to watch all the trashy reality TV like Love Island, and I thankfully never watched it, but when I was passing through the living room, I'd glimpse these like the men were just insane, right?
Yeah,
Just
it's
absolutely
unbelievable.
jacked. And I'd look at them and I'd think, well, if you're on this show, I'm assuming you're an idiot. But at the same time, you're jacked. And the amount of work, as someone who has gone to a gym for like a year solid at a time and basically nowhere, the amount of effort that must have taken to get into that shape is commendable. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And there are so many people out there on TV and on social media that have these amazing physiques, and it's really impressive. But then there's like fitness influencers. I've seen a few videos on YouTube of people going around gyms saying like natty or not to people, and there's this kind of common misconception where people assume that if you take steroids, you are this absolute behemoth, right? Absolutely ginormous.
Right.
But then there are other people in there who look like just like a jacked
Relatively
person.
great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, just like a relatively great person. Yeah.
they look like Hugh Jackman for Wolverine, right? And they assume, okay, he looks in really good shape, but he's not enormous, so he's probably natural. And then it turns out, no, even to get to that shape, it's steroids. There's only
Yeah.
so far you can get being
Yeah,
natural. And it's,
there's a physique cap for your genetics, right? And a good way to test that is through the size of your bones, right? So you could take a look at, places. So basically the science behind it is we look at places where fat's not really stored, but you can get access to your bone, like your wrist, right? Your wrist, there's not a whole lot of fat in a wrist, right? So you can get a tape measure and see how thick your bones are, and you can kind of approximate how muscular you can get without steroids. But the thing that's so terrible about steroids is, they've done studies on this, right? And I think the studies they've used it with Dianabol, right? So 50 milligrams of Dianabol a day, which is a lot. That's a lot of steroid, right? It's kind of a lot. But a person who's not on steroids, you're training for the first time, this is the most amount of muscle you can build. You're in the prime of your life, you're doing great. You can expect to gain untrained about 4 pounds of muscle your first few months, right? So 4 pounds of muscle per month, maybe to 2 months, maybe to 3 months if you got some special genetics. But 4 pounds is kind of the cap, right? If you were to take steroids at that level, right, 50 milligrams of Dianabol a day and do no training at all, you can expect to gain anywhere between 4 to 8 pounds of muscle a month doing nothing. No working out. Don't show up to the gym. You gain 4 to 8 pounds of muscle. And if you choose to take those steroids, and work out, the upper limit is now 12 pounds of muscle a month, right? And, muscle, again, a pound of muscle burns 50 calories a day, which is another thing to think about. So if you're gaining 10 pounds of muscle, you're burning 500 calories, 500 extra calories a day. It's 3,500 calories in a pound. You gain an extra 10 pounds of muscle, you're burning a pound a week in body fat, right? If you're not eating to make up for that difference, right? Because it's calories in and calories out. There's a caloric balance that needs to get met. And so when you're adding 12 pounds of muscle in a month, and then you're doing that not just for 1 month when you first start training, but you can go ahead and do that for 3 months, 4 months, gain 50, 60 pounds of muscle throughout the course of a year. And your body is now eating through those calories at such a tremendous rate. So now you're looking super low body fat, super muscular, all this stuff. It's easy to think like, okay, this very quickly becomes an impossibility, right? Our skeletons can't retain muscle without the induction of that, of those performance-enhancing drugs, to be quite direct. And even furthermore, what happens when you take a guy who comes onto those steroids because he was out of shape? He was in bad shape, but he's going to start taking 50 milligrams of Dianabol because he's tired of being bullied, or he's got some reasons he wants to be in better shape and in a visual sense, right? He's not concerned about his health. Well, he starts taking that, and since he's gaining 4 to 8 pounds of muscle a month, and you're gaining 4 pounds of muscle a month, it's easy to go, oh, what that guy did was actually reasonable without steroids. He might not be on steroids, but there's no way of knowing because he could have been working out and putting in the work, or he could have just been on the drugs.
Yeah.
And even that is hard to contend with because that guy will have a set of advices when he's on the other side, right? So now he's fit and he's got his fitness Instagram and he's going to tell you some things. Those things are not going to be anywhere based in reality because he didn't do this the natural way. And so fitness professionals are constantly struggling with that. And, I personally have never taken steroids. I've never, done testosterone or anything like that. But it's easy to see how fitness professionals can fall into that. I'd be lying if I didn't say there weren't times where I thought about it. Said, hey, I'm capping off where I could be physique wise. I mean, for me, I was on getting closer to like 185, 190 pounds at my height, and I was sitting at like 3 or 4% body fat, super lean, super strong, and part of me was going, hey, maybe it's worth trying these other things.
Yeah.
I remind myself why I got involved in this, about health and everything else, right? I have a deep history going, this is about health. This is not about looking good at the beach and being bigger than that guy, right? This is not why we got into this. And so luckily I've managed to sort of stay away from that trajectory, but it's very easy to see how a lot of people fall into that world, especially depending on where you come from. But I say this to say, it's hard to look and go, Hugh Jackman, was he on steroids or not? Well, I don't know. I mean, does he have access? Absolutely. He's a celebrity, right? Does he have a reason? Sure. He's got to prepare for a role. And I have to ask my question, not why would he, why wouldn't he? Is
Yeah.
this a person who in his personal life really deeply cares about his health? I have no idea. I don't know Hugh Jackman as a person, right? So,
Mhm.
comparison is the thief of joy, right? I'm sure you've heard that before, right?
Yep.
Comparison is the thief of joy. And that's why it's just better to not even look, right? Understand the advice people are giving you. Don't listen blindly. Listen to what their explanation is. Listen to the studies and watch them dive through research and make your own conclusions. Don't go, that guy's strong, I trust him. Because there's a whole lot of, science is really doing a great job of making, undisciplined people look stronger and stronger.
Yeah, totally. So what's the target audience for your book? Is it for
I think,
trainers?
yeah, for me, it's for anybody who's becoming a trainer, thinking about becoming a trainer, on the fence about it, or if you already are a trainer and you're kind of struggling, like you're not getting clients, you're not figuring it out. For me, I just put in there chapter by chapter. Chapter one is, all right, how do we do this? How do we get the trainer license? Where do we go? What's respected in the industry? What's not? These are questions that I have the answers to just simply because I was managing trainers, right? And I had resumes appear before me and I had to make a decision based on those resumes. What Who was more professional, who understood the science better, who was less likely to hurt somebody, who was more likely to gain clients, right? Who was more likely to make sales. And it's really, I think, it's really for the person, I think, a great fit for is someone who's saying, look, I've been fit. I'm interested in becoming this thing as a passion of mine, but I was never taught how to be a salesman, right?
Mhm.
And I don't know a whole lot of exercise science. I know what I see online. It's like, well, how do we get you to the level of you? And my book doesn't dive into the science at all. I am not going to teach you how to be a trainer, right? That's for NASM. That's for these accreditation services that, they're going to test you on that and they'll give you a textbook and learn how to do it. My question is all right, now you've decided you're thinking about this. These are the tests you want to take. This is what the job is going to ask of you. And just to go on another tangent, I had a trainer come in once. There's a person working at one of my gyms, and this guy was so sharp. I mean, I knew the science, and so I knew that he knew the science better than me, right? That's where we were, right? It's like I'm smart enough to know you're really smart, right? And the guy knew more exercise science than I did, right? He was practically a physical therapist, right? And he was going to school for that, and very sharp kid. He wasn't particularly fit himself. He wasn't the most muscular guy in the room, right? He wasn't turning heads when he was walking down the street. And I think he'd
Mhm.
agree with me on that. I won't mention his name, but I think he'd agree with me on that. And in addition to that, he didn't have the sales ability. He wasn't outgoing, right? He wasn't going over to people and going, "Hey, I want to teach you how to do this. I just learned this thing in my college class that it's going to make you not feel pain in the next 6 months, or it's going to make you, I noticed that you're performing this sort of way, and we could do this form a lot better, right?" He didn't have the outgoingness to reflect how deeply knowledgeable he really was. And the people weren't going over to him because he wasn't fit. And this was a poisonous situation for his career because this is a sales job.
Yeah.
And so I feel as though now written that book, I think that was my audience, to be honest. I think
Mhm.
that kid was my audience because I think to myself, it's, it's sort of like when you're in college, right? There's a beautiful girl sitting across the bar, right? And you're saying to yourself, man, I wish I can get up and go talk to her, right? She's so beautiful, and I wish I could have a conversation with this girl. And you're a great guy, right? And you know you're a great guy. You don't mean this person any harm. You're not trying to cause any damage. You're not going to cheat on this person or do something crazy, right? You're a person that just you wish the best for this person, but you want to talk with them. You want to have dialogue. And you're sitting there, and all of a sudden, some stud walks in the bar and goes over to that girl and starts talking. And he's a jerk, right? He's a terrible guy, and he's gonna give bad advices, and he's gonna cheat. He's gonna run around, and he's that type of guy. And you're
Yeah.
looking at the guy and going, man, I should have had his confidence because he's just gonna basically mess up this girl's next month. And like, meanwhile, I could have been with this girl. And I think that that's the situation we find ourselves in as trainers. It's just like, you might have all the information, but you got to have that confidence to go over to somebody and say, hey, look, like you're what's needed. And you can't allow that client to go follow the advice of someone wrong just because they were the first approach. And nowadays with everything online, everybody's always the first. You're never going to be the first introduction of fitness to anybody, right? Stuff is all over the internet. If they have any remote interest, they've already Googled it, right? So how do you become that person who comes in and with an air of confidence and knows what they're talking about, explains training programs to somebody and teaches them how to get into that industry and really make money, and the same way, like, everybody deserves to find love and everything else. If you're a good, if you're a good guy, you deserve to find love. If you're a good trainer, you deserve to have clients, even if you're not the most outgoing guy and, super social, right? So that book was like an instruction guide. Now, personally, I'm going into more of the coaching side. I want people to be happy and healthy, and I'm seeing a trend. This is why your podcast stood out to me so much. I am seeing a trend with men of our age range. I would say even younger. I think as we go younger and younger, it's actually getting worse and worse. That are falling into this depression and falling into, I would say, unhealthy ways of living, unfinancially sound ways of living, and sort of they are in a depressive sort of state. And, now I think similar to you, maybe my goal is to trying to just grab people out of that. Like if I could just reach out and just grab someone by the collar and say, okay, come with me. Things are going to get better. We have to do this together. That's where I sort of am now. And that's kind of what I want in this stage of my life at 29 years old.
Yeah, I get that. I totally get that. I was seeing people having a hard time, and I just wanted to reach out and grab them and be like, I know where you are because I was there and now I'm here and I want to help. And that's all I'm trying to do. Back to what you were just talking about. I think we're living in this age of shortcuts. Everyone wants the shortcut. There are people online who either, whether or not they do or not, don't use steroids, they look super fit. And as you say, that subconsciously tells us they must know what they're talking about. Also, people might, getting super fit and healthy is a lot of hard work, right? And it's probably not particularly exciting either. If I'm some overweight guy sitting on my couch scrolling through TikTok or whatever, and someone pops up and starts talking about the science behind nutrition, I don't care. That's not going to get me inspired. Whereas someone pops up in their lycra or whatever, and they say, here's 3 things you can do to lose 20 pounds in a week, and it's eat a carrot and walk up some stairs or something. Those kind of shortcuts are the things, especially in this generation where people have TikTok brain and they can't focus on things for more than 3 seconds or whatever. Unfortunately, it might be, this is pure speculation, but it might be the case that there are some trainers or influencers who know that the information they're putting out there is bad. But if it gets them views and it gets them likes, it gets them money.
Oh, absolutely. We live in a very clickbaity sort of online setting, where just reading the title is like, oh, okay, yeah. That either you're going to get into the first 30 seconds of the video and say why your title is completely wrong, or you're going to carry on with this because you think you've made some shocking revelation as a personal trainer, not as a scientist. So it's, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, absolutely. I think another one that's a more honest way in your sphere, the whole fitness influencer thing, is more honest and really speaks to me. I see a few of these are the ones who show that where they used to be. So used to be obese or overweight or whatever. And now here I am now. And it's like, okay, he does know what he's talking about because he was there. And now look at him. So that's the credential aspect. He doesn't have to be super jacked. Just the fact that he's lost all that weight. And you're the perfect example of that, right? You could be like, here I am when I
Thank you.
Couldn't walk. Like I was having 50 seizures a day and I was in this stroller, and here I am now where I'm a trainer and I'm doing, I want to talk actually about your personal records, because you sent me in your notes a few personal bests that you had. So what are they?
Well, I've lived a very varied life in the fitness sense. I have been in many different bodies at this point in time. And so, there was one point where I could bench press 315 pounds. I was weighing maybe 160 pounds-ish at the time. There's points in my life where I was dunking basketballs. I was a high school varsity athlete. I was able to dunk a basketball pretty easily. I was able to run a mile in 5 minutes and 10 seconds in the beginning of, or the end of 8th grade, beginning of 9th grade, which was, it's very, for people who run, they know that that's pretty fast.
Yeah.
And I've been all over the place. I love doing different things. I got into calisthenics to a point where I was doing, muscle ups. I was able to do 24, 25 straight muscle ups. Which always having fun with that. And push-ups, I was able to do 100 consecutive push-ups. It got to the point where I was even encroaching on 200 consecutive push-ups, and I have video of that. I've been all over in fitness, with my own body, because different things are important to me at different, points in my life, and I made my body adjust those as I learned the science. So those are my personal bests as far as training goes. But even to this day, I try to separate myself and say, I'm not just a fitness guy, right? I'm not just a muscle geek, right? my interests are also in finance and also in, personal development and psychological development. I think when you were mentioning, you see these people online stuff, it's the two things that always come to mind is comparison is a thief of joy,
Hmm.
and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? Don't see a finished product and get discouraged from starting, right?
Yeah.
Just we're all about like, here's where we were yesterday and here's where we are today. And if I'm one workout ahead, then beautiful, right? Like excellent. We did one workout. That will stay with us for a long time. That doesn't ever get deleted in your body. The fact that you work out and you did that, even if it's just one workout for half an hour, even if it's 15 minutes. If you go for a run for 15 minutes, your body doesn't forget that. It remembers everything. And maybe throughout the sands of time, some things you feel like get forgotten, and you know what I mean. If we were fit one time, we lost some shape, and this and that back and forth. But muscle memory is a real thing. It's incredible how, your body will pick back up if you were fit in the past is one thing. And it's also incredible how you really can get fit. You really can make incremental changes every single day and just, sort of, like with a chisel and just go away at it, chisel and just go away at it and etch and etch and etch.
Yeah.
And you can't let the finished product ever, discourage you. You can't be like that. It has to just be, hey, can I beat out yesterday's version of me? Am I
Hmm.
a little better than I was yesterday? Hey, if I'm in debt, right? If I owe, I think like looks, how many people in this country have tons of credit card debt, right? You just go, hey, I had X amount of dollars in credit card debt yesterday, and look, if I have $5 less today,
Yeah.
I have $5 less. That's gone. That's that. I killed some of that debt, right? And it's not about I need to pay off all my debt tomorrow, so maybe I should buy lottery tickets. No, that's not the right approach, right? A little bit of time, incrementally, we'll get there, right? Don't you know? Don't let the perfect be an enemy of the good, and don't trip on what's behind you either, right? There's another quote I love is only a fool trips on what's behind them, right? How you trip on something that's behind you? Just got to keep moving forward and stay the course as best as possible.
One of Jordan Peterson's rules for life is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not who
Oh, that's
someone else
great.
is today. And
That's great.
yeah, it's all about, there were times in like my 20s, let's say, when I'd go to the gym and after 3 months, I wasn't in shape all of a sudden. And I was like, this is going to take too long. And I'd quit. It's unfortunate, as I say, I'm a little late to the race, but I've only recently understood that it's a marathon, not a sprint. So as I
Oh
say,
yeah.
in my 20s, I'd go 3 months and be like, I'm not suddenly jacked, so I'm just going to quit. Whereas now I'm like a year in. So my trainer does 10-week programs, and you do a testing week at the start and at the end. And I'm like a year in. And yeah, when the numbers, like I compare my numbers now on bench and squats and deadlifts and everything to what they were a year ago, it's crazy. And I can see it's a slow thing, right? So I'm not anywhere near where I want to be, but I have progress photos taken every
Totally
month.
okay.
Yeah,
It's better if you're not where you want to be, actually. It's
it's
better
more.
if you're not
Yeah,
there, because when you get there, you'll either have to change the goals or you'll stop going, right? It's just better to be not where you want to be.
exactly. But like, just the fact that I can look at a photo at the start of April, which will be in a couple of days, compared to January or February, it's only a few months away. But the fact that side by side I can see a difference, that's enough. That's enough to make me keep going. And one day,
Absolutely. Do you have a trainer or anything? Where are you getting your advice from or anything like that?
so my guy has his own gym.
Oh, cool.
It's a small independent gym. He's got about 300 customers or clients, and what he does, it's really small. So it's in like an industrial kind of warehouse sort of thing. It's only free weights, so no machines, but he's got about
Awesome.
10 squat racks, plenty of benches, tons of dumbbells, like a dozen barbells, and it's just him. And he does, as I say, these 10-week programs for all of his clients, plus a nutrition, like personalized nutrition plan for everyone based on their weight and their muscle mass. He's got one of those body composition machines,
Oh, the yeah, yeah,
so he
the ones
gets
you
them
hold your
on.
hands out like
Yeah,
this and
exactly.
yeah.
And it measures like bone density, how much water you've got in you, like muscle mass, fat mass, all that stuff. Yeah, that's really good. He
Awesome.
started really small though. He started in his garage a few years ago, and then with a couple of people, and then it got to like half a dozen, and then a dozen, and then 20, and it was like, okay, time
Open up a
to,
facility.
yeah, exactly. Anyway, so have you got any? Actually, no. Before we get there, I've got a few questions that I like
Mm,
to ask my guests.
sure.
So, a piece of media, whether it's a book or a podcast, film, anything that has had the biggest impact on you and your journey in your life.
I'm a little bit of a history buff, actually.
Cool.
I'm really into World War II history.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm very a lot of stuff coming out of World War II, out of that moment in history, I feel like has been very, I don't know, has sort of affected me in that way, I guess. Learning about what was going on and competition wise, and that has led some impact on me. There's a lot of lessons I can go into from that war that were really, really interesting. But podcast wise, I would say in relation to finance, Stephen Graham. I don't know if you ever heard of. I don't know if that
The
name rings
actor.
any bell. No,
Oh,
no.
well,
Maybe
no,
it's Graham Stephan. I don't. He has his two first name syndrome. It's hard
yeah.
to remember how his name was. But he's a real estate guy. The advice he gives is mostly sound. I haven't heard him. I mean, I haven't heard everything he said. You never know nowadays. People say things off the cuff wrong, but seems to give pretty good advice. And Jeff Nippard in the fitness world, really never seen him say something incorrect. He really dives deep into the studies. He's also works out himself.
Mhm.
He again, you never know who's on steroids and who's not, but I genuinely believe he's not, just because of how much science he knows. It makes sense. So I would say, yeah, I mean those two heads, Graham Stephan and Jeff Nippard, great people to listen to. As far as books, I mean it's hard because it's just hard to pinpoint one that you say, yeah, this is where a lot of life lessons come from. But
No, that's fair. It's
yeah,
just sometimes some people go through their life experiencing adversity and hardships, and then they'll come across one thing, and that's the like light switch that changes everything for them. So that's why I like to ask that question.
there was I might be mistaken on the title, but I think it was Edith Wharton's The Valley of Childish Things.
Hmm.
It's a very short story. I believe that was the title. I could be mistaken on the title, but certainly looking that up, Valley of Childish Things, you'll certainly find the piece. That
Okay.
was a coming of age. It's just a few pages, but it was a coming of age, book. I guess it's not a book. It's just a few paragraphs, but that was pretty life changing for me. Those few pages, I would say, also.
I'll check that out. Um, I have a feeling I already know the answer to this, but I might be wrong. If money and expertise were no object, what would you be doing for a living?
Man, I fitness. I mean, health. I mean, right? If money's no object, what's the next thing? It's like, let's take care of our bodies. It all starts there. It's your body and your mind, and those two things are so connected too, right? Unhealthy mind is an unhealthy body, and
Yeah.
vice versa. Really, it's incredible. So I've always felt like I just want to pull people out, right? I just want to, you just want to have teammates, and you want to drag people with you and just say, we're going to get better. Like, let's go. So I think on the coaching sense, I don't think it's never even been about money, really. It's, I wouldn't say money's been no object in my life. We have to take care of our financial health too, but absolutely, right? Like, we just want community. We want, that's all we really want, is just to have a network of people around us, and all of us drag each other in the right directions in the ways we best know how. Have people, friends around you to drag you those directions too. So that's what I would say about that.
Cool. Have you got any social media or anything for people to come find your work?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's just my name. It's at Instagram.com, so it's just Aubrey_Canna. So you're welcome to add me as a friend on there, and and see just see pictures of my personal life. Really, I think there's gonna be a podcast coming. I do look forward to that in the future. Haven't gotten settled on a name yet. Maybe when that day comes, we'll put in the link in the description
Sure.
for the video. I'll reach out to you and say, hey, if you could throw a little link under there for me when I open up mine. But currently, yeah, I mean, it's the first time I'm really getting out there and saying, I want to really start speaking to all people. So. Not much in the way of social media yet.
That's fine. I'll put your Instagram in the description. And your
Awesome.
book, remind us of the title.
Yeah, How to Succeed in the Big Box Gym, and it's a guide to becoming a top trainer, right? And again, it's a book on no science in that book. It's just teaching some lessons, and yeah, I would say for people that are looking to do it, you could buy it on pretty much all platforms. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble and everything. But if for whatever reason you can't afford it, just send me a DM on Instagram, and I'll send you a copy. So we'll make sure you get it either way.
Very generous. I'll put that in the description as well. Well, thanks for your time, Aubrey.
Of course, it was a pleasure speaking to you. I hope you keep going with the podcast. Get to that next milestone. Right, we're gonna get to 10 soon, and only up from there. I look forward to seeing you.
Losing